I'm here to listen. Why am I walking on this way?
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Muse's AT Podcast, where you can relive my epic journey with me. This is Muse, and what follows is my Appalachian Trail story. Today's episode covers Friday, June 6th, 2025. We start the day at the Katahdin Stream Campground, excited to have the journey started, but pretty tired from our strenuous day on the greatest mountain. Katahdin means the greatest mountain in the Penobscot language, representing the mountain's spiritual and physical prominence, serving as a sacred place of birth in Native American legend. This day would be our first zero day on trail. And today's haiku is from November 23rd, 2017. Thankful for new life, for the paths that led me here, and roads yet untrod. Okay, a couple of terms here today. The first one is one that you're going to get to hear me say wrong in more than just this one episode, but I think everybody pretty much says it wrong. And I'm going to say, and I've said before, a Seanock. The actual correct way to pronounce it is Canuck. It is actually a Gaelic word for a hill or a knoll or a hump. And the reason that the water filtration company has this term as their company name is that this company was founded in 2016 by an avid hiker named Gilad Nachmani. And interestingly enough, the company didn't start with water filtration bags, but it actually started with trekking poles. Nachmani was hiking a mountain in the Scottish Highlands named Cannach na Garaig, probably not saying that right. One of his trekking poles snapped, and frustrated by the failure of that gear on that hill, he resolved to design better, more durable trekking poles. So he launched his outdoor gear company, named it Cannach, in honor of the place where the idea was born. A couple years later, the company developed the flexible, wide-opening Vecto water bladder. The Vecto became an absolute game changer for lightweight backpackers, thru hikers, and anyone tired of squeezing water through rigid, narrow-necked bottles. And as you may remember from the gear episode towards the beginning of the podcast, I traded up for a Cannach at the Appalachian Trail Lodge and Outfitter. And another term that I bring into this episode is leave no trace. So leave no trace actually started as a loose connection of wilderness ethics in the mid-20th century before evolving into a standardized framework that we use today. And basically, towards the mid to late 20th century, you had a lot of people, especially with the surge in hiking and outdoor recreation, people were starting to have a negative impact on the land. And so the U.S. Forest Service, National Park Service, and the Bureau of Land Management began to develop the Leave No Trace principles. And the principles are as follows. 1, plan ahead and prepare. 2, travel and camp on durable surfaces. 3, dispose of waste properly. 4, leave what you find. 5, minimize campfire impacts. 6, respect wildlife. And 7, be considerate of other visitors. June 6th, 2025. Zero day. Start, Katahdin Stream Campground, Maine. End, Katahdin Stream Campground, Maine. Miles, 0. Short entry today. We're taking a zero in the park before we hike south out of Baxter State Park. Should be pretty laid back, just relaxing in Katahdin Stream Campground. Gives me a good opportunity to mention the bugs. The bugs are insane. Within minutes of arriving in camp a couple of days ago, I was making good use of the head net I picked up in Millinocket. They seem to pretty much leave you alone while hiking, in my one day of experience, smiley face, but stop to do anything and they swarm you. Despite copious use of bug spray, hope we don't run out, I have so many bites, it's crazy. Anyway, back on trail tomorrow, talk to you then. Hey everyone, Muse here with a quick update before we get back to the trail. I just got the numbers for our very first week and I am super excited. 114 downloads in our first 7 days. Just seeing that number was very exciting. It represents that a number of my closest family and friends are really engaging with my Appalachian Trail story, and that is astounding and also humbling. I did a little research to get the proper perspective on that and found that that first week performance is top 25% for all podcasts globally. I'm completely blown away. This ad spot first airs as I'm just hitting the festival grounds for my first trail days in Damascus, Virginia. If you hear this and see me at trail days, please let me know. I want to thank you in person. To everyone that I now get to call my audience, a sincere thank you. I am truly grateful that you chose to join me on this journey. Now, back into the woods. All right, so as you may recall from earlier, I had the 4th and the 5th reserved in Katahdin Stream Campground. So before going to sleep the previous day, I headed up to the ranger's office and caught up with Corey, the ranger, added the night of the 6th to our reservation. When I did that, I was talking to Dan, metronome. It was probably around 7 p.m. on the 5th. Michaela was already asleep, done for the night. They pretty much had tagged the peak and rushed down just as the storms were coming in. So they determined that, like us, they would zero on the 6th. So we're going to hang out with Dan and Michaela for a little bit here, as I had previously said. Despite it being only our 2nd day on the trail, we needed the rest. Haley didn't actually come out of her hammock on the 6th until early afternoon. I slept in as well, but also had some time sort of alone to enjoy my surroundings and catch up on writing. Those early days, I tried to keep my handwritten journal close to daily. It didn't take too long into the trek, though, to realize, honestly, that was a little bit silly. I had the online journal, which I was already dedicated to doing daily for the at-home audience that was following me. So kind of silly to be trying to essentially double up on that. After a while, that fell into a kind of a nice cadence where the handwritten journal was about every 3 weeks, which I used that to then focus on Maine themes after the prior 3 weeks and also write in stuff that I didn't necessarily at the time want to share with the at-home audience, at least not in the moment, right? I did try, and I get real in the online journal, and you'll hear that, but I did try to often filter things a little bit just so that people wouldn't worry about me, right? Because of course I was having fun, but there's only so many times you can say, hey, I'm having a blast, and by the way, I'm running into this difficulty. Because let's face it, this is something that has difficulties. There are hardships out on trail. That doesn't mean, anyway, what people will hear is the negative stuff, right? And so I kind of did run that through a filter. So on the 6th, after Haley got up, we moved our campsite. The campsite by the Katahdin Stream was booked for the night of the 6th, right? So Corey ended up finding us a site on the other side of camp, so we actually did that move, and then we settled in for a relaxing day on the other side of Katahdin Stream Campground. One of the other things that's worth talking about here is just the Baxter Park Rangers, because they've got a bit of a reputation amongst through hikers. A lot of the hikers on trail will say that the Rangers just absolutely hate through hikers. The Rangers are awful. I'll tell you about what's really going on here and then a little bit about my own experience with it. Baxter State Park was founded by Percival P. Baxter, who was governor of Maine from 1921 to 1925. He originally wanted the state to buy the land around Katahdin to preserve it, but he faced opposition from the logging industry. So what he ended up doing was he ended up purchasing the land in like 28 different land grants that he purchased the land, donated to the state. But he had a particular way in which he did this because he really was looking to preserve the land. He made that completely independent from the Maine state park system and self-funded by a trust that he left for that purpose. And he put a bunch of conditions on that. And the conditions were basically, they boiled down to being that the land be kept simple and natural. And so there are a number of rules in place that they in turn boil down to really the leave no trace guidelines. So the Rangers, they're there to enforce those rules, and that's what's first and foremost. They are Baxter Park Rangers first. The fact that this is the northern terminus of the Appalachian Trail, that comes second. And that's understandable, right? My experience, if you're okay with following a few conservation guidelines, these Rangers are great. And the Rangers that I met were absolutely awesome. They were as much of cheerleaders to Haley and me as anybody else out there. We met two. The one who I checked in with on the day of the 4th, the great guy named Corey. He was brand new to being a Ranger. He was totally excited for us. And we checked in with him when we first got there. We got situated and everything. And then he came around, I'd say near dinner time. We talked to him for a little bit. He sat down and talked with us. Like I said, he was wonderful. A little bit later, we were already in our tents, and he just came by and just kind of tapped on my tent and just said, hey, you guys are good for tomorrow. So we knew that we were good to go for the next day, which was absolutely great. But my point is, this guy Corey, he was awesome, right? There actually is another park ranger that we ran into too. So we ran into two. The second one, I don't even remember his name, but this was leaving the park, and that's actually a funny story that will hit in a couple of episodes from now. So stay tuned for that one. Kind of more generally, those days in Katahdin Stream Campground were absolutely beautiful. The campground itself is beautiful. The weather was perfect, beautiful, cool, sunny days. The grounds themselves are beautiful, and Haley and I were just starting to learn really who we were in the woods. We cooked our first 3 dinners. We practiced setting up tent and hammock. I hiked with a tent, as I mentioned in the gear episode. Haley's shelter was a hammock, an asymmetrical Hennessy hammock that I'd used a number of times prior in both prep hikes for the trail itself, also prep hikes for Philmont. I didn't use the hammock either, obviously, on the AT or on the Philmont journey. That Hennessy hammock has quite a nice setup, but unlike an Eno, though, you have to know your knots, right? So one of the things that was kind of funny, ends up being funny, I think it was a little frustrating maybe, especially for Haley at the time, is that throughout my scouting career, I'd actually gotten pretty good at knots, but it had been a few years since I'd really tied those knots myself or especially taught them, right? And the other thing is, the ropes on the hammock are those kind of slippery ropes, so you really kind of need to get your knots just about perfect. So there was at least one night in particular in the wilderness I can think that Haley ended up on the ground and she ended up mad at me and she ended up going and sleeping in the shelter. But in Baxter State Park, that didn't happen. It just kind of sometimes took a little bit longer. So anyway, we were learning, we were dialing it in. Otherwise, we really spent some chill time in Baxter, as I mentioned, at Katahdin Stream Campground, and the site is quite nice. Now, on the 4th and 5th, we were right by the actual Katahdin Stream, which was beautiful. The stream is a very strong stream running off of Katahdin, and day and night, we were filled with the sound of rushing water. We also got our first practice at collecting and filtering water. Now, there's some debate as to whether or not you have to even filter the water from these untouched wilderness streams in Maine. In fact, I know Utah, he didn't start filtering until he got out of the whites. And honestly, he did just fine, or I think he did just fine. We'll have to ask him about that. But in my mind, it was always safer to filter the water. What I didn't want to do is I didn't want to end up, with some sort of stomach bug, Giardia being the main one, and therefore lose hiking time on trail because I'm laid up in town somewhere. The water from Katahdin Stream is absolutely perfect. This cool, clear mountain water that you basically kind of hear about in commercials. Well, it's real. I was able to try some of it. Some of the best tasting water you'll ever find. And that's kind of a general thing too. Like when I was on trail, I would say that the water on trail tasted better than any water I've ever had in my life. There are a number of ways that you can purify water. Most people filter, but you can also chemically treat as well. There are even solutions where you can use ultraviolet light to kill the bacteria. You could even boil the water, but I don't think anybody really does that. It would take forever and it would waste your fuel. And honestly, I didn't observe anybody really doing the chemical or the ultraviolet light either. It was really just filters all around. For filtering water, as I mentioned in the gear episode, I like the Sawyer squeeze. So the way that process worked, I'd collect my water in my CNOC pouch that I had bought in Millinocket, which is really a durable, clear plastic pouch with a screw top cap on one end where you can connect the filter and a larger opening in the back that you can unfold to collect, but is usually folded and clasped to remain watertight. It wasn't until I was almost in Vermont that I learned about that end, honestly. It's clasped so well that it was kind of hidden from me. And Ratatouille showed me, hey, you can open up the other end and it can be a lot easier to collect water sometime. So I learned that from him. Early days of the trail, I was solely collecting using the small screw top end, but most of these streams in Maine were rushing so well that I didn't ever think to have a problem with that either. Anyway, once you have the water in the pouch, you can then screw the filter on and squeeze that into your water bottle.
Before I left Maine, I acquired a coupler from Amazon. I had ordered that in Amazon in Munson, only to discover hours later that Poet had them on hand at the outfitter. So that was a little bit silly. I ended up going a couple more weeks without that coupler than I really needed to. So that came to me in Rangeley when Carrie and Evan visited. And that coupler actually changed things considerably. So these early days, I didn't have it. So actually, I should probably describe what I'm talking about, this coupler. What it did was it actually screwed the other end of the filter to my smart water bottle. Now, my water bottles were smart water bottles. I left any Nalgene's at home. They're just bigger, heavier, a little bit harder to deal with. The smart water bottles were great because they were replaceable. I would just on occasion recycle the ones I had and buy 2 brand new smart water bottles, get brand new smart water in a town, and then those would be my water bottles. They're out for a little while. And actually on Amazon, you can only get 2 of those couplers. And so I only ever needed 1. So I ended up giving the other one away. And we may even talk about that later. But early on, I was basically aiming the filter into the water bottle, which went one of 2 ways. I mentioned squeezing through the Sawyer squeeze by squeezing the C-knock and just kind of letting that, pressurize through the filter. The other thing that you can do is you can simply hang sort of the whole thing up and let gravity take the water into the filter. And I played with that a little bit in Baxter. And my early method was that I tie up the C-knock in the filter with a 2/2 hitch and use a taut line hitch on the other end so that I could set the height and set the water directly on top of the smart water bottle so I didn't lose much water. So it kind of worked like a charm in the sort of near perfect shelters within Baxter. Got a little harder in some of the less than near perfect shelters in the 100-mile wilderness. But in any case, once I got that coupler, I didn't have to do any of that anymore. I would just hang it, and the water bottle was attached to the whole rig, right? The filter and the C-knock. And pretty much everybody on trail had those couplers. I had remembered it from a couple years ago and just never had gotten it before trail. So it was one of those things that I think I probably remembered in the wilderness. And I was like, I've got to get myself one of those. Between the squeeze filtering and the gravity filtering, I tended to gravitate, for lack of a better term, towards the gravity filtering because, especially if I was stopped, right? I would actually, I could set it up, just let it do its thing. Sure, it's going to take a little more time. But if I'm stopped, especially if I'm in camp, I can just do a bunch of things around camp and just let that do its thing. I don't have to sit there and squeeze, right? When I was talking to Poet and Munson doing my gear shakedown, he actually recommended the gravity filtering because that way it wouldn't clog up your filter as quickly. So after hearing that advice, I just made that my standard. I would generally take my breaks at water sources and eat while my water was filtering. But then sometimes if I was in a little bit more of a hurry for whatever reason, I had that squeeze option, and I would do that on occasion too. In the really early days, like Katahdin Day, this was one of the suggestions from Won't Get Up Will, and she was definitely right about it. I could carry my C-knock full and also my water bottle. So I carried my full, basically 4 liters of capacity. And that was definitely needed on Katahdin. So I was very glad I followed that advice. I did carry 4 liters of capacity every time I left a water source. I started doing that in the wilderness, but I very quickly found out that it was unnecessary. So then I got into what I had mentioned during the gear episode, carrying the C-knock empty, just utilizing it at the water source and leaving that water source with my 2 smart water bottles full. There was a saying on trail, don't carry water over water. I think that one's a little bit extreme, right? Because you end up going over water in Maine, I don't know, at least every mile in some stretches. So like to stop at every single water source would be crazy. So I think it's a little extreme to say don't carry water over water. But at the same time, it didn't make sense to carry a full C-knock either, right? It was awkward. It was basically on a carabiner on my pack. And I cut that out. In Munson, I also got a sleeve, and I was actually looking for this. I couldn't find it online. I couldn't find it in the outdoors or sports stores near me before going to trail, but it was on a short list that I carried with me to Millinocket. Now, I couldn't actually find this in Millinocket either, but in Munson, I got it finally, the sleeve that actually attached to the strap of my backpack. And that allowed me to carry 2 water bottles then going forward. I still had to in the wilderness and up Katahdin, but I carried them on both sides of my backpack, which was kind of a pain because I would need Haley's help to grab my water bottle for me. I couldn't really drink water without stopping if I was on my own. The sleeve on the strap of my backpack allowed me to have that one water bottle, sort of the active water bottle, if you will, in front of me. And then I would only have to stop if I needed to switch the water bottles or if I was at a water source. So that was really cool. And so for most of my hike, in fact, my whole hike after months in Maine, I had one water bottle on the front and one water bottle on the side. And that should just about do it for this episode. When I sat down to write this one, I didn't necessarily set out to put in so much about water filtration, but then giving you, the listener, an idea of what it is like out there in these sort of granular details is also very much the point of the podcast. So I'm glad it sort of turned out that way. Be sure to give me that feedback. That's Muse Hikes on Instagram, or email me at museatpodcast@gmail.com. I'd like to know how this is going for you and what sort of specific topics maybe like that, like the water filtration, that you're interested in. Who knows, if we start to rack up some questions, maybe I'll even work in some Q&A. I think that could be kind of fun. Next time we talk, we'll get into the 100-mile wilderness. Until then, this has been Muse. Thank you for walking with me, and happy trails.